Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, and today I've got a very interesting video that's going to help you, whether you're an advanced player, whether you're a casual player, whether you're somebody just trying to get better at the game, have an idea of how to continue, or maybe for the first time ever, build some decks on your own. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight in this video are engines. So basically, engines have been a term used in trading card games for decades, and an engine is not necessarily the main win condition of your deck, but it's a part of your deck that helps get to your main strategy, or it complements your main strategy. Now, for the sake and the purpose of this video, and to not get into, argument semantics, we're going to say that engines are anywhere from 2 cards to 4 cards, and they are usually going to involve a trainer that makes the engine go, or they're going to be a bunch of synergistic monsters slash Pokemon, right? So basically, cards, they may all be Pokemon, but they're complementing each other and what they're trying to accomplish. So let's highlight some of the engines that we already know, and let's talk about how these engines are being used and utilized in decks right now. So let's start off with one of the most popular engines right now, and arguably one of the best engines in the game so far. It is going to be Druddigon along with Leaf. Now, Leaf is going to have the ability to synergize with Druddigon, and that's what you're looking for in these small engines, right? Like, your main strategy is most likely not going to be attacking with Druddigon, but what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to have time, unless your opponent's just dealing 100 damage right away, to go ahead and get to your main strategy. So it's kind of like a stall and wall. Now, this has already started to morph into some other engines. Now, for example, there's one other engine that we can highlight that really emphasizes Druddigon, but it's also emphasizing Tauros. Now, this engine is going to be used specifically in EX formats, whereas maybe the Druddigon and Leaf engine alone could be utilized in the non-EX formats. But with this engine, you're seeing a lot of decks start to basically play this, as well as maybe a stage 2. Now, some of the stage 2s that you're seeing with this engine could be Pidgeot, could be Blastoise. Obviously, you've got other ideas that you could try to use, like Greninja even. So this is a really interesting engine in its own, because basically you're building on that Druddigon Leaf engine. Now let's keep going. This is the Greninja Druddigon engine, and granted, this is half of your deck, but what it's trying to do is build upon that Druddigon and Leaf synergy and give you the ability to not only deal damage while you're being attacked, but maybe able to deal damage when you're not attacking either, right? So you're being attacked or not attacking, but you're still able to deal damage. Now, the most notable deck with this big engine, right, is going to be Gyarados. Now, there's other ways that you could also approach it. I mean, heck, you could play Pidgeot, you could play Wigglytuff, you could also play some of the fighting Pokemon, which is maybe it's a lot of Pokemon, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. But again, when you take a look at this, this is basically combining 3 different engines, or at least 2 different engines into one. You could also obviously look at the Tauros engine, jam it all together. But basically, you're playing what, 1, 2, 3, 4 cards. This is a 4-card engine that you're playing 2 of. So this is going to probably be, teetering on, is this, not necessarily an engine? That's a whole nother topic, but just kind of giving you ideas on how to build on these engines and, kind of make other decks. Now, another popular engine that you're starting to see, and this is going to be one that's featuring all Pokemon. Now, the reason why this is, something that I would prefer to, kind of label as an engine is because these aren't necessarily your main win conditions, but, they can be if, depending on the matchup as well. But a lot of the time, I think you're going to want to pair this engine with another stage 2, whether it's Greninja, whether it's Pidgeot, whether it's even something like a Machamp maybe. But what you're trying to do here is you're trying to force your opponent into making plays that they may not like making. So, for example, you may start with Hitmonlee and they choose not to bench anything, but you're able to switch into Farfetch'd. They may KO your Hitmonlee, but you're able to send in Marshadow. They may KO your Farfetch'd because they're just getting a lot of pressure from it, and now you're able to bring in Marshadow. And because all of these energies can be fighting energies, you don't have that, I hope I get the right type of energy. If you want to play Greninja, which by the way, that's a very hot deck as of today. It was played in Urshi's tournament apparently last weekend as well, where somebody was playing Greninja and they weren't playing any water energy. So basically, they're pinging you for 20 with Greninja. They're putting pressure in your face with with Farfetch'd or Hitmonlee, and then whenever you KO something, hopefully they're able to move in a Marshadow into the active and deal 100 to it, and maybe the Greninja is able to put that last touch on it if needed, or maybe it combos 100 damage plus 20 from the Greninja for 120 knockout. So there's a lot of different math there, but again, this can be used in a lot of decks, and hey, it's something for you to go ahead and potentially cook with. Now this is kind of getting into some of the main fire engines. This is going to be Moltres and Leaf. And a lot of you are familiar with this, right? It's got really good synergy because it allows you to pivot out of that Moltres without losing any energy. And maybe, later in the game, you bring that Moltres in and you're able to continue ramping, or you're able to knock something out that's a game winner for 70 damage if you're able to build it up while it's on the bench. And this is going to be the core of a lot of Arcanine, Arcazard, Cinescorch decks, even some Blaine decks that try to feature Moltres. This is going to be a great engine, right? So again, Moltres is kind of that thing that it's like a ramp engine, but now it's got the ability to pivot out of the active spot a lot easier with Leaf. Now, this is the first engine that we really saw get a lot of attention in the game. This is the Wheezing engine. And basically, the idea is that you absorb damage, you soak damage on Wheezing, and you don't even have to always play Dark Energy. Sometimes you can just use it as a damage sponge, where it's taking damage, it doesn't get knocked out, but it poisons, and then you Koga it back to your hand. It allows you to pivot in another attacker and hopefully finish something off. Now, one of the easiest ways to play this engine is with Arbok. As of Mythical Island, people are playing Scolipede with it as well. There's even some Mew EX engines that are playing, Wheezing and Mew. You could pair this in a lot of ways. And the key part with these engines that I'm showing you is sometimes they are very type specific and they require you to play energy to complement them, and sometimes they don't. And so there are times where you can play Wheezing engines without dark energies, and then there's some times where you're like, hey, it doesn't hurt, let's play it with the energies. But you're seeing this with Pidgeot EX. You're seeing this with obviously the two that I already mentioned, Scolipede and Scolipede and Arbok. There's a lot of different ways that you can cook with this. There was even a time in the no EX format where people were playing Melmetal along with Wheezing, obviously Dragonite and Wheezing, even though Dragonite's terrible. But there's just all sorts of ways that you can cook. One of the running jokes that we had in one of the discords I'm in, the Pocket Legends Discord, is people would build a deck and then I would chime in and say, but can it play Wheezing? Can you just throw the Wheezing engine in it, right? Does that add anything to the deck? And it became kind of a running joke because everybody started just splashing Wheezing for a period of time. And now the new trend is that Drudagon engine, right? Can it play Drud? That's kind of the running joke. Now let's keep going. So this is a newer engine as well, the Mew EX engine. Now this one is not necessarily taken off as much, and there's a lot of reasons for it. But what this is doing is it's using a trainer much like a Koga, right? Except it's going to be only for Mew, as opposed to Koga maybe could pick up Muck, but Muck is pretty bad, so you're probably not playing it. But anyway, so the idea is very similar to the Wheezing engine, where you're taking damage on this Mew. Maybe you're able to play Psychic type energies to go ahead and ping for 20, so that way you're still getting a little bit of chip damage in, and then you budding Expeditioner it back to your hand. And hey, This is probably not necessarily a super strong engine right now. And that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to highlight with some of these engines is sometimes these engines may not be good right now, but they may be good in the future, or maybe we just haven't unlocked how they're good. But you could go ahead and throw this engine with Executor. That's definitely a thing that you could do. You could get really, cheeky and play Koga and Mew together. You could also do things like Greninja with this. I mean, there's the Tauros decks that you can play and maybe include this as well. So there's a lot of different ways to cook with this. But let's keep going through these engines. So this is another engine that you can potentially tinker around with. And, to be honest, I didn't even include the Mythical Island Executor and Execute, but that's definitely something that you could potentially cook with. But let's talk about this engine for a second. So this engine, I tend to think of it as more of a 3-card engine, like one egg EX, and then one Erica. You could obviously choose to play the base Executor along with the egg EX. That's definitely a thing. But again, when I look at this engine, I'm thinking that it's going to take up 6 slots, at most 7. Now, there may be decks that you want to take up 8 spots and play, the base Execute as well. And maybe you want to switch out this Execute, right? Maybe you want to switch it out for the Mythical Island Executors because you don't want to play Grass Energies, right? So I don't recommend that necessarily, but that's definitely a thing. But you could combine, if you just take out the eggs, actually, hold on, let's go back to so if you take out the eggs, the Executors, the base Executors, and then you put in Greninja, that was the deck for a little bit, right? And I think it's even seen some play recently. If you want to play Mew EX along with this engine, obviously you cut the base Executors, you could get away with that. You might want to keep one Executor. One of the big keys that I'll point out with this engine is that it's really good in the early game. Executor EX does a great job of putting pressure on your opponent, and so even if it's the non-EX version, it's very good early game in a lot of matchups. This may be something that, hey, you're not used to playing a 2 Execute engine along with 3 Executors, but it's something that you should definitely entertain in some fashions and some ideas that you may be cooking with. Let's keep going. So the Surge engine is also something that we saw a lot of popularity, a lot of play in the Genetic Apex format. Now that we've got to Mythical Island and Gyarados is such a big deal, we see mostly Zebstrika. But always keep in mind that this could change with new Magnetons, with new Electrodes, and even in Mythical Island we saw a new Raichu. So the main idea of this is you're playing basically Pikachu, Raichu, Surge, or you're playing Voltorb, Electrode, Surge, or you're playing Magneton with Magnemite and Surge. Now there are some decks where you may try to fit in an Electabuzz to complement the other Pokemon and to give you more synergy with Surge. That's definitely a thing. So you've got a lot of flexibility with this Surge engine. Unfortunately, it's kind of, like I said, fallen out of favor because it's a lot of deck space, whereas a lot of the time you just want Zebstrika to make sure that you can keep those Gyarados from hitting the board. So that's the Surge engine. Now, this is an example of an engine that may not be good right now, but if we get Steelix or if we get a new Onix, it could be something to come back to. But this is the Brock engine. Now, this is a very small part of your deck that hopefully, again, we're probably not playing this right now, but definitely keep an eye on this in the future. And again, if we see a Steelix that, maybe requires colorless energy, even though it's a Steel type, well, you might be able to still play Brock, Onix, and then use the Brock on the Onix before you evolve into Steelix, and maybe you're able to attack on curve. So there's all sorts of different things that may come into play with Brock and Onix. So I didn't want to leave it off the list. It's just not a very good engine right now necessarily. Even in the non-EX formats, right? You're probably just better off playing Golem, right, than trying to play Onix. So these are some throwback engines with some newer cards, right? Like Hypno was a card that a lot of people tried to play around with, and it just kind of didn't really work. But this is a way that you could probably make, Mythical Slab work with Hypno, maybe give you a little bit extra, thinning of your deck, or at least it gets you a card closer to your Hypno engine. You could combo this with Mew EX as well, and just to have some damage soaking, some potential to put things to sleep. But you would need an actual attacker as well in that deck. But these are just different small engines, and again, not all these engines are going to be the same in power wise. Like pretty much some of these engines are just not very good at the moment. This is another throwback engine. If you remember the first few weeks, maybe the first month or so of Genetic Apex meta, there was a lot of people playing things like Frostmoth in their deck, and it wasn't the main focus of their strategy, right? It was just something that complemented it. And I think that that's a perfect way of illustrating how engines usually work. Sometimes they're going to be all Pokemon, sometimes they're going to be Pokemon in combination with trainers, but usually, like I said, a lot of the time this is not necessarily the main focal point of your strategy. However, it complements it. There were some people that went all in with this kind of strategy and just said, hey, I'm going to play Hypno along with Frostmoth. And that's definitely a thing you can do. And some people even played, Jigglypuff as the new promo came out. And speaking of Jigglypuff, this is another engine that's kind of fell off, but it used to be, for a brief time, a nice little kind of out of the meta pick where people would play Wigglytuff and some of these other decks, right? So you would see, maybe you wouldn't see the Wigglytuff, the base Wigglytuff, but you would see 2 Jiggly, 2 Wiggly EX, and Koga. You would see 2 Jiggly, 2 Wiggly Executor. You could even say 2 Jiggly, 2 Wiggly, and Greninja. So there's all sorts of things that people were kind of cooking with, but now as the new meta has kind of taken shape, honestly, Wigglytuff just kind of fell out of favor, and it does get squashed by Gyarados. That's a little bit of an issue. So right now, probably the only way to play this kind of engine would be with snipers like Zebstrika or like Hitmonlee. So that way you could try to pick off those Magikarps before Gyarados comes out. But you could definitely play around and still cook with this engine, whether you wanted to play just the Wiggly EX and the Jiggly, or whether you wanted to play, like a 2-3 lineup where you play 2 Jiggly, 2 Wiggly EX, and 1 base Wiggly. The base Wiggly is notable just because it allows you to attack on curve, right? So if you go first, if you go second, you can attack with Jigglypuff, put something to sleep, and then on turn 4 of the game, your turn 2, you're able to evolve into Wigglytuff and then hit for 60. So that's kind of nice in some scenarios. Obviously, if you go first, it's a little bit different, right? Because you're not able to attack first turn. But again, these are just some small engines that I hope just kind of gives you an idea of how you can build some different decks. And again, when you take a look at the top decks of the meta, some decks are able to play a lot of these engines. Notably, you'll notice, let me show you another deck list that is not necessarily playing an engine. So something like a Mewtwo EX is not necessarily playing like a single engine, like just the entire deck is pretty synergistic, right? It's got a lot of synergy. There's not really an engine in this deck. It's just the core of Gardevoir, Mewtwo, and then, maybe a couple of tech cards like Mew EX and Jinx, right? There's not really an engine in this deck. Maybe you could say Gardevoir is the engine, I guess. But yeah, it's not necessarily featuring like, an engine that's your side strategy. Gardevoir is kind of like the main strategy of that deck. Another deck that you could look at that doesn't necessarily have an engine, it's just got like different, I guess you could say Zebstrika is an engine in this deck list, because you could switch out that engine for maybe an Electrode, maybe a Raichu and Surge. So maybe you could say that's an engine. And that's definitely fine, right? Like that could work by whatever definition. I don't want to get into semantics about the core and an engine and text and all that, but again, like these are just some different decks that may not play like a typical engine that complements it, or an engine that's like a side win condition. But again, if you could definitely look at Zebstrika as being a little bit of an engine on its own, and of course you can combine that with other engines to make a whole deck. But again, just some different ideas to kind of help you as you're building decks, and who knows what the future holds for other engines that we may discover with the cards that we already have, or with the brand new set that we hopefully get at the end of the month. But I hope that you enjoyed this video, and one thing that I want to leave you with, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about really quickly, so let me get to those before I end the video. So you're hearing this first on YouTube. I've told maybe a few individuals, but this weekend for Sunday, January 12th, you will be able to catch me on Ursi's stream. I will be one of the co-casters that she's had featured on it. So you will get to see me kind of do a little bit of commentary along with Ursi on her stream. So shout out to Ursi. Appreciate her giving me a chance to co-cast with her. Very excited about that. And I know a lot of people have asked me to try to go ahead and get out there and do some casting. So I'm very excited about that. And again, you know, this is just one of those things where I want to take time to thank you for watching these videos, and thank you guys for, you know, subscribing to the channel, because without you guys doing that, you know, I probably wouldn't, you know, be in a position to be, you know, co-casting with somebody like Ursi, who hosts the largest Pokemon Pocket tournaments every weekend. So again, shout out to you guys. Shout out to the Pokemon Pocket Legends Discord, and for them being so helpful to me as I, you know, continue trying to create content that helps people. Thank you to Ursi for giving me that opportunity. And again, a huge thank you to you guys that are out there watching from all over the world. It's so cool. And that's one of the great things about the internet, right? So again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for letting me be background noise. Maybe you learned something, maybe it was just entertainment, but I will catch you later, hopefully live on Twitch, January 12th with Ursi. Also keep in mind, I will put out a video probably in about 12-14 hours from when this video goes live, detailing the top 32 or top 64 for the Ursi Day tournament that I will be helping cast as well. So until next time, I'll catch you later. Peace.